Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast. We are live here in Taipei for Computex, though not live by the time you listen to this podcast, so a bit confusing. But anyway, sitting next to me is a man that knows a lot about laptops. We've got Jarrod from JARROD'S Tech. Well, you say that, but you actually do a lot of laptop testing.
Yeah.
Probably the reason why we haven't done a lot of laptop testing on Hardware Unboxed, because we sort of thought there's another reviewer out there who's actually testing way more laptops, doing a really good job of all the testing. So we don't need to keep companies honest. We can just let you deal with all of that crap. So
It's funny you say that. It's kind of the same reason I stopped doing monitors back in the day.
oh, really?
I used to do monitor videos, but I didn't really like them. And I was just like, that guy does them better. He can have all the monitors.
Right, yeah, because I don't really enjoy testing laptops, if I'm perfectly honest, but you seem to enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's all right.
So you're here at Computex, obviously, to cover laptops. Mm-hmm. What is the big laptop development at Computex?
Not really a whole lot, because all the new CPUs and GPUs for gaming laptops were kind of already announced at CES in January. So the big thing that came out was the laptop 5060. So there was also desktop 5060 here. But yeah, now it's just a case of a lot of laptops also have that lower end part, which is hopefully good, because until now there's only been like the high end 5090 and 5080 type of models, which are super expensive. So everyone's just kind of been complaining about the pricing and looking for something more mid-range. So hopefully things improve a little with that.
So is the 5060, there's obviously been a lot of complaints about the 5060 series, especially with the 8 gigabyte sort of side of things. Is it as bad for laptops as well?
It's hard to say. I have watched all of Steve's VRAM comparisons, and obviously it's a pretty big deal on the desktop side. Based on what I've seen, I don't think it's quite as big of a deal on the laptop side. So at the moment, the 8 gig options are 5070 and 5060. It looks like the 5050, which has been leaked for laptops, is going to be 8 gig as well. So it was 6 gig last year, so even less. So hey, at least that's got 8. Although I guess kind of weird that the 50, 60, and 70 are all 8 gig. Like, I don't know what's going on there.
Well, that's just the way things are these days.
Yeah, but so in this test I did, it was last year. So the highest end laptop part was a 4070 with 8 gigs of VRAM. That was the top end with 8 gigs. And I was like, oh, how could I compare 8 and 16 gigs, kind of like Steve did on the desktop side? And the only way I could come up with was to get RTX 3080 laptops, because the 3080 was available with an 8 gig configuration and a 16 gig configuration, but the GPUs were otherwise exactly the same.
Yeah.
There were very few laptops that had those GPU options in the exact same chassis, but 1 gigabyte Aorus models was one of the few ones. So I was able to buy those and basically do a VRAM test with the 3080.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the 3080 was also performed similarly to the 4070. So I kind of pretended like, hey, this 3080 is kind of a 4070. So we could kind of see like, if the 4070 had more VRAM, more than 8 gigs, would it actually matter? And in pretty much all the games I tested, it didn't really make a difference, because laptop GPUs just aren't anywhere near as powerful as like the desktop counterparts. So what ends up happening is, in all the games I tested, you run out of like GPU horsepower and your frame rate goes to crap well before you run out of VRAM. I mean, it might depend on whether or not you've actually got, like a high-end texture pack or something. Maybe it'd be a bit of a different story. But like just in, the popular games with the default built-in setting presets, I don't really find too much difference.
I think part of it as well would be right that desktop gamers are much more likely to use higher resolutions than laptops, especially because I know there's 1440p laptop screens and 4K laptop screens. They're becoming a bit more popular, but 1080p is still much more prevalent across laptops, especially for those lower tier models, right? Like if you're buying 5060 and 5070, you're probably not getting the highest tier screens, right? Like it's largely the lower resolutions
1080p,
where things are a bit more free.
Yeah, 1080p is still very common. 1440p, I'd say in the last 12 months has kind of had a bit of a push, so it's gotten a little more common. But even those 8 gig laptop graphics GPUs, they can run games at 1440p pretty well. Like even without upscaling, it's not too bad. I mean, not getting like 200 FPS in Cyberpunk or anything, but
sure, yeah,
definitely usable.
So I guess another aspect would be not as much ray tracing is happening on a laptop GPU.
Yeah.
And ray tracing generally increases your VRAM requirements. And so if you've got something like a 5060, which is it clocked and spec'd lower than the desktop 5060 outside of power, or is it just the
I haven't actually looked at how their specs compare. Based on all of the other parts though, I would assume that it would be lower, because with like the 5090 obviously and 5080, they're much lower than the desktop cards. I could be wrong about 5060 because I remember last year, I think the 4060 laptop and desktop had like same CUDA core count.
Okay.
It was something like that. It was just a slight power difference.
Yeah.
But yeah, apart from that, all the higher tier ones, the gap got bigger as you go up.
Okay. So yeah, so you're basically saying VRAM isn't as much of a concern on the sort of desktop, or at least on the laptop parts versus the desktop parts.
Yeah, at least not based on my testing.
Yeah, so which is interesting. I guess it's just the different form factors and expectations that you would have. And I think that the issues that we've seen is obviously what is the highest performance part that has 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and how much, like what are the sort of settings that you would typically use on that, and where the restrictions are going to be. Whereas on a laptop, even a 5070 laptop is probably not going to be pushing super high in terms of mid-range or higher performance that you would see on a desktop.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about, which kind of relates into a lot of what we're seeing and hearing from NVIDIA at the moment, is some of their pretty dodgy, misleading marketing, which we've seen heavily on the desktop with things like 5070 equals 4090. Back when I was covering laptops, even worse on laptops. Like every product is just a complete disaster in terms of the naming. You've recently been starting to test 50 series laptops, 5090 laptop, that sort of thing.
Yep.
What do you think about the 5090 laptop being called the 5090 laptop?
Yeah, I don't think it's great, because we definitely see comments where we do like a laptop and desktop comparison, and some comments will actually be surprised that they're completely different. I think most people seem to be somewhat educated and understand that they're not actually equivalent despite the name.
Yeah.
But there are definitely people who come to our videos and they're quite shocked about how big the difference is. Yeah. The difference can be pretty big. So a couple of years ago when 4090 came out, we compared laptop 4090 and desktop 4090. I think at 4K the desktop was like 60 to 70% faster on average. And now this year with 5090, the gap is even larger, because the gap between 4090 laptop and 5090 laptop is extremely small, of course, not counting frame generation.
Yeah.
So when you compare the 5090 laptop with 5090 desktop, well, the 5090 desktop did at least have some improvements. I think Steve said they were disappointing. That
it was still around 25% faster.
That's more than the laptop, which was like 3% based on my testing.
Right, so an embarrassing margin.
Yeah, so laptop improves 3%. Desktop improves 20+%. Yeah, the gap gets even bigger between laptop and desktop this generation. So at 4K on the 5090, it was about 90% plus.
Okay, so huge margin.
Pretty big, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an issue, especially for the casual buyers that you were sort of talking about. You get people going into their local retailer just wanting to pick out a certain thing, and they hear 5090 is the fastest product. Like that's the fastest, best thing. Look at what people are doing gaming on their desktops. I'm getting, 5090 laptop, that must mean I'm getting the exact same thing. But then it's not just that it's slower, because it has to be slower. It has to be, you're not getting a 600 watt GPU into a laptop. It's not possible, right?
Yeah, no.
But it's not even the same GPU. Like the die, the memory configuration, everything is different about it.
Yeah.
I guess they're just going, well, the naming scheme has to make sense, right? Like the 5090 is the highest tier product, therefore 5090 laptop.
Yeah, I have asked NVIDIA about this in the past, and that seems to be their argument, that basically the 90 class is just like, we want them to know that this is our top option that we have. So rather than people thinking, desktop and laptop, they should be comparable, NVIDIA seems to see it as like, we can see that it's a 90 tier GPU. Therefore, we know we're getting the best experience from the laptop. And
right.
I kind of get that, but I disagree with it. I think it's too confusing with just having the same names on laptop and desktop side.
Yeah. And it's not even the same memory configuration, is it? It's 24 gig on the laptop, whereas it's 32 gig on the desktop. And that's a big issue that applies across the whole lineup. Like we were talking about the 5070 laptop, that's 8 gig on a laptop.
Yeah.
And we said 12 gig is probably not sufficient for the desktop. It's even worse on the laptop. And so that applies across most of the lineup, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So is it the 5080 would be the only card that has the same VRAM, 16 gig for both?
Yeah, it's 16 gig. It was 12 with the 4080.
Okay, so at least they're giving you a little bit more there.
They boosted the 80 and 90 GPUs VRAM capacity, but yeah, 70 and below, it's the same, well, except 5050, which has gone up from 6 to 8.
Right. So yeah, it's kind of getting worse over time, isn't it? Because you said the 4090 desktop versus laptop, about a 60% difference.
Yeah.
Now you're saying it's almost double the performance.
Yeah.
Like surely this is just going to keep getting worse and worse, because laptops are always going to be limited to that sort of, I don't know, like 170 watt power limit for the highest models.
Yeah, well, some of the laptop OEMs say, you know, hey, our cooling can take way more wattage than this. At the end of the day, we're limited by NVIDIA.
Really?
So, yeah, a lot of them want NVIDIA to allow, you know, like, I guess, unlocked BIOS. Let us do whatever we want, but I guess NVIDIA wants to control how much power they can actually use.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought they would be interested in doing that, because if a laptop can do, say, 250 watts, you'd think they would want to, I mean, not there's going to be AMD competition, right? But if there was competition, they'd want to head off and just make sure the products are the most powerful that they can be. But maybe there's an issue with, like, they don't want the laptop part being so good that then it raises the bar for the next generation.
Yeah, so with the 5080 and 5090, like if you look at a power scaling graph, it kind of, you know, the more power you add at the start, you get big performance boost, but then it kind of tapers off towards the end. So I guess adding more after 175 is probably going to be diminishing returns at play anyway. But then others have shown with like this 5070 Ti laptop, 5070? Yeah, 5070 Ti laptop GPU, it maxes out 140 watts. But if you look at performance on its power curve, it's like kind of, you know, there's no steep drop off. It looks like it could keep going, but they've capped it at 140 watts. So if that was unlocked, it could probably keep going and keep gaining performance relative to the additional power. But people are, you know, speculating that NVIDIA doesn't want to, you know, have the 5070 Ti fight too much with the higher end 5080 because
it's cheaper.
Yeah, just sell more 5080s if people want the performance.
I guess the other issue that you have with laptops that you don't have on the desktop side is that each OEM has their own power configuration. Yeah. So then you run into issues where a 5080 that is at a lower configuration, so not the max power that they offer, is going to be slower than the highest power spec on a 5070 Ti.
Yeah.
And so that was a big issue back when we were covering laptops at Hardware Unboxed, where, you know, it's not just the name is bad relative to the desktop line, but the power configuration is often obscured, so you don't really get the full picture. Whereas at least with your reviews, you've got very detailed power numbers so that, you know, you can quite clearly compare the products and know exactly what you're getting. So there's just such a variance on laptops in the name scheme that you don't get on a desktop. Yeah,
the biggest difference that comes to mind, it was back when 4050 and 4060 first released on the laptops about 2 years ago now. I had a 4060 that ran, I can't remember, it was like 45 or 50 watts or something, but a 4050 that was like 100 watts would outperform the 4060. So you end up in a situation where 4050 is better than 4060. Now, technically, the 4050 did have 6 gigs of VRAM compared to the 4060's 8. So at some point, that would probably be more of a factor. But you know, for like just 1080p gaming at more of that low to entry-level gaming laptop point, you'd be better off spending less money potentially on a lower tier GPU just because it has more power.
Yeah, I mean, that really goes to why we stopped doing as much laptop coverage. It wasn't just you doing great reviews, which I think is very, very true, but it's also that we were trying to do more like GPU coverage. So when there'd be a 5080, like back then it would be 3080 laptop coming out, we'd want to test the 3080 laptop. Yeah. And so we go and test the highest performing spec in a couple of laptops if we're lucky. Usually it was just whatever one we happened to get at the time. With a desktop, right, you test a 3080, it applies across all of the AIB cards within a small variance because of OC models. But pretty much you tested the MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, whatever option you get, it's pretty close.
They're all max power.
They're all max power.
They're not running half or something random.
That's right. And if that happened, there would be a huge outroar, right?
Yeah.
With laptops, though, we tested 3080, and then it turns out, Dell puts it into a chassis that's thin and light, and so they down spec the power, and that happens across. All OEMs have different configurations. It just became a huge mess, and we didn't have the time to cover the scope of laptops that you do. So
it's a pain.
You very much see with your charts, like normally you would expect there'd be the 5090 at the top, then 5080, and it would go down. But then with your charts, it can be very mixed up between the different models, which must make it super bad for consumers, figure out what's the actual value products.
Yeah, exactly. Like when we reviewed the Razer Blade 16 with 5090, it's a lower power 5090. I mean, it's still up there, but it's a thinner laptop. Razer Blade is what it is. But we ended up in the case where like 5080 was ahead of that in plenty of games, at least at like 1080p and 1440p. Once you get to 4K, the 5090 can start actually being utilized more. But it's messy. It's really difficult to deal with, especially when trying to do comparisons. It is a bit more helpful now because many laptops these days have like a power slider for the GPU. So you don't just buy a laptop and you're limited to this wattage. If I want to test like 80 watts, I can dial it back, and now I can test the performance at this wattage level.
Okay, that's good.
Not every laptop has that. It's still pretty niche, but the ones that do have it are the ones that I try to get so I can use in the comparisons. And that's how you can get like the nice power scaling graphs and see like what FPS you get at like 80 watts versus 100 watts or 150.
Okay, so it's a nice feature, I guess, because people want gaming laptops to be more portable, and you can't run 150 watts on battery for very long at all.
No.
So you're looking at like 20, 30 minutes of battery, if that?
It depends. So a lot of the time I end up capping the frame rate, and we've actually found with 50 series in particular, one of the main benefits is the power efficiency, in terms of laptops at least.
Right.
So like we run a game benchmark on battery, and I think the 5090, it was like 70% longer runtime compared to the 4090. But that was basically the only benefit that I could find was the power efficiency.
Well, that's even an interesting benefit, because what we see on the desktop side with Blackwell is there doesn't appear to be very many efficiency advantages for the desktop parts. Like if you're getting a 5090 versus 4090, it's 25% faster, it uses about 25% more power. Yeah. And you see that across pretty much all of the models. Whenever there's a performance improvement, power goes up by a corresponding amount, which makes sense. It's the same TSMC 4 nanometer, right? So it's all on the architecture, but you're seeing on the laptop side that the architecture is actually providing a benefit in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, at least for battery life while gaming. Haven't looked into while not gaming, because I guess most of the time Optimus will be on in that case, which means that lower power integrated graphics will be running things. But yeah, while running an actual game and having the NVIDIA GPU under load with both laptops capped at the same frame rate, same screen brightness, the 5090 seemed to have quite a good advantage. And I was keen to test that because at CES, NVIDIA was specifically mentioning their improvements to battery life. So it seems like that has lived up to the claims.
So when it comes to like the pricing of laptops, the 5090 laptops are absurdly expensive.
Yeah, they're insane.
What are your thoughts in general on like how expensive these machines are getting?
So as someone that runs a deals website where we try to share laptop deals, it's been very difficult because kind of as soon as the 50 series started rolling around, it was almost like they stopped production on the 40 series because they just like went out of stock in most places. And the amount of deals we had listed just diminished. So there's not much at the moment. There are some models that aren't too badly priced. Like there's an MSI Vector with I think 5070 Ti that goes on sale for like $1699, $1799, which is a bit below what the 4080 laptops cost, and I believe their performance is kind of similar. So that's not too bad. But yeah, at the higher end, the 5090s are just ridiculous. I think you're looking at like $4,000 US or something.
Right, and again, it's like 3% faster than the old model.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. The 4090s, before the 5090 came out, you could pick up for like $2,200 best case sale, $2,500 is probably more likely. If you wanted a more premium model, maybe like $3,000, maybe $3,500. You know, if you're getting like extra RAM, extra SSDs, and all that type of stuff.
Right.
But now with 5090s, it's like base cost is like $4,000.
Yeah. So NVIDIA and their OEMs are making a boatload. But again, they can justify that. No, I'm saying that they should justify that, to be clear. They shouldn't. But they can, because the GPU on the desktop side has gone up by a significant amount as well. And while was supposed to be like $1,600 US for the 4090 up to $2,000 for a 5090, really you cannot buy a 5090 for $2,000. So it's making those sort of high tier GPUs expensive. But across a lot of the content that I've watched from you, it's never really come across like the high tier GPUs are ever really worth it. They seem like they add a lot of cost, like thousands of dollars, but they don't really give you that in terms of performance gain. Yeah. Not as much as on the desktop side, where there's more scaling towards like cost per frame. On laptops, it seems to just like really ramp up hard for those top tier models.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Like just thinking back to 4080 laptop versus 4090 laptop, the 4090 was usually like $500 plus more expensive, but you would only get like a 15% gain at that point. So it's kind of like, if you've got the cash and you want the little bonus, you might as well. But otherwise, 4080 was like a really solid sweet spot. And part of the problem I think NVIDIA had last generation was the gap between the 4070 and 4080 was quite massive. Yeah. If I recall, I think the 4080 laptop was like 50% ahead of the 4070. Okay. So you get a 50% jump by going 4070 to 4080, but then 4080 to 4090, it was like 15%. But then the price difference between those tiers is kind of similar. So you're really paying more for diminishing returns.
Yeah, which used to be the way with desktop GPUs until NVIDIA sort of went, well, people will pay extreme amounts. But I guess with the desktop side of things, it used to be better for the consumer, because you could ramp up from like 3060, 3070, 3080 and start getting pretty decent performance gains. It wasn't costing you too much. And then you had to pay a huge amount for the top tier bit. But it's kind of, you're saying, like, maybe the 4070 was a bit under-spec'd for what it should have been. It should have been a bit higher up in that.
Well, I was extremely surprised that, so 4070 laptops came out CES, so January 2023. I was expecting January 2024 that they'd do like a refresh and maybe have like a 4070 Ti or 4070 Super, because the gap between the 4070 and 4080 was just enormous. Fortunately, this generation, that doesn't appear like it's going to be as big of a problem, because they've got the 5070 Ti already between 5070 and 5080. But like we talked about before, it looks like the 5070 Ti could, keep running up if you added more power. But it appears they've artificially capped it so that they can keep selling the 5080. But I guess at the end of the day, it's preferable to have the Ti than not, because the situation with 40 series, that giant gap between the 4070 and 4080 kind of sucked.
Well, it probably also meant that NVIDIA can, again, do more things for the future generation. If there was a 4070 Ti refresh that was super compelling, then you'd be competing within a year with the new 50 series products, limits their options a bit there. And, I'm sure those refreshed laptops would have had the latest CPUs and all that sort of thing in them. So that would have impacted things as well. So, tough times on the laptop front for buyers. You're kind of getting really screwed. So where's the price floor though these days? Like if you're trying to get an entry level sort of laptop, are those also outrageously priced?
They're not too bad. At the moment, you're still looking at 40 series just because 5060 only just came out. 5050 is still not technically released. Mm-hmm. So you'd be looking at 4050 type of price range. The best prices we've had on the deal site for a 4050, I think it was like $499 US.
Okay.
So that was actually pretty good. Otherwise, 4050 is usually maybe more like $600. I wouldn't really want to go cheaper than that with like the 3050s, which they still sell, and the 2050s, because you just, at that point, you're spending like $400 for a laptop. I know for a lot of people, going that extra $100 to $500 is quite a big investment.
Yeah.
But like at that lower end, you really get so much extra performance from like the extra money. The extra money goes much further at the bottom end than it does at the top end.
Yeah, that's always been the case, because you have to skimp on like every component at that point. Like they're trying to shave off $20 from the display, $20 from the memory, $20 from the GPU, and that all adds up to make the product a lot worse.
Yeah. So people will complain and say things like, oh, $500 gaming laptop, that's not budget. I guess because unfortunately they aren't able to afford it. But the fact is, if you spend less than that on a brand new laptop, you're probably just not going to have a good time. You know, the exception would be like buying a secondhand laptop, which can be good value. But yeah, new for less than $500, it's probably not really worth it.
I guess below $500, it's mostly like the non-discrete gaming, like the non-discrete GPU products that are sort of like your Chromebooks and that sort of thing, like your Snapdragon laptops with the ARM stuff in it, which I guess isn't as much of what you cover, right?
Yeah, I haven't touched an ARM laptop yet. I know they say they can do gaming, but I guess until they can compete with discrete graphics, we haven't really been too interested.
Have you tested the largest AMD APUs? What is it, Strix Halo, whatever it's called, with the, I don't know what they've named the GPU in there, but it's supposed to be the performance of like a low to mid-tier NVIDIA GPU.
Yeah, we have. So I think that's currently only available in 2 devices, unless that's changed. There's like some HP like business enterprise laptop for some reason.
Interesting. AI.
Yeah, that's probably it actually.
Yeah.
Because it can use 96 gigs of VRAM for the GPU.
Yeah, okay.
So that's probably it.
Yeah.
And the other one is the Asus Flow Z13, which is kind of like a tablet device. So it's 13 inches. And yeah, I think I compared it in like 25 games with a 4060 laptop, because I think AMD or Asus were claiming that it was competitive with a 4070 laptop GPU. I was like, I don't know about that. Let's compare it with the 4060. 4060 was like 20% ahead. So it's a fair bit, but at the same time, you got to remember, I guess it's kind of integrated graphics versus discrete graphics. It was still very impressive, also considering the fact that it's a 13-inch machine, and my 4060 laptop was, you know, like a 15-inch full power 100-watt plus thing. I think AMD was comparing that chip against a 4070 in the Z13 as well, because they used to have that a couple of years back. So it would have been, you know, probably like a 50-watt part or something like that. I don't actually know the exact wattage, but my point is, comparing chip for chip in a 13-inch tablet, they were saying that, yeah, the AMD one is way better, which is probably the case at that lower power.
Yeah, I thought that chip design was certainly very interesting, because we always hear talk of like APUs at some point are going to replace these sort of entry-level graphics, and I guess it's possible that if that particular APU was allowed to run at the power levels that the 4060 was running at, so, and it probably would have to be higher than that because it's got the CPU side of the things integrated into that power package as well. That would have been, certainly very interesting to see what it could do. But obviously when you start making claims like this is as good as a 4070 laptop, then you probably want it to be as good as, you know, the general's laptop that people would be getting.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that part hasn't really been widespread. I would have thought there'd be a lot more interest in it, but I guess not.
I suspect the problem is maybe production and pricing. It seems like it costs a ton of money, although I think Framework are starting to use it in their desktop. So that might be a good way of testing it at higher power levels.
Yeah, there's been a few mini PC sort of designs, which I think have been probably the most compelling use of that chip.
Yeah.
Again, we're not completely on top of all the APU stuff and what's been happening, but you know, we've seen some very, very compact desktop PCs, which obviously have those advantages you were talking about, where the APU can be used with a high level of VRAM and sort of, to deliver good levels of performance for sort of AI workloads and that sort of professional use case, which seems to be like, I know AMD did angle it as well to gaming, but it seems like the market is saying maybe not for gaming and maybe just more for AI. And as with all business decisions, right, if they can sell the chip for way more in an AI-based PC or laptop or something, they're going to do that, and then they're going to not sell it to the gaming market. Because if you're talking about like a 4060 laptop, that's a lower cost laptop. And so to be competitive on price when they can sell it in, you know, workstations or whatever, they'd have to probably make it pretty cheap. And it's a large APU, so would be on the more expensive end of parts.
Yeah, still very impressive with what it can do in a 13-inch tablet. Also extremely expensive, which I don't know if I mentioned. So I guess relative costs. I think with the 4060 laptop, I think in my comparison video, I said you could buy like 3 of those laptops for the cost of the 13-inch tablet. So you've got to factor that in too.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a form factor discussion, isn't it? How much are you willing to pay for a certain form factor? Yeah. But at that point, like I've always thought, and this is probably again why I don't cover laptops anymore, but like the handheld market is so mature now and has a lot of great quality options, Steam Deck, ROG Ally, those sorts of products, that if you were thinking of like the 13-inch gaming laptop, like the tablet sort of thing, it is a bigger screen and more powerful than that sort of device, but you can get a Steam Deck for like $500-600 US for the nice OLED version.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's pretty hard to compete with a, your sort of niche form factor tablet sort of thing. It's larger, heavier. SteamOS works really well in how it's integrated into games and that sort of thing.
Yeah, especially now with the Z2 Extreme starting to appear in the newer handhelds too.
Yeah, that's going to be big. Hopefully we see some Steam Deck refreshes and I can go buy another one, get a nice upgrade in performance. So yeah, I've been told, maybe whispers have come to me, that you don't actually use a gaming laptop all that often for gaming.
Oh, exposed. Yeah, that's true.
So I want your pitch of like, why should someone buy a gaming laptop? Like what is the use case of those big machines, or should you go just like the slimmer and lighter stuff? Is there actually a reason to buy instead of a gaming desktop that we normally focus on?
Okay, so at the end of the day, I think it comes down to whether or not you actually need portability. If you don't need portability, desktop. And that's the reason why I personally use a desktop most of the time, because I'm at home making my videos, you know, might as well have the best performance, bigger screen, all that type of thing. So that's the reason why I use a desktop. When I travel, at the moment, I'm using MacBook Pro 14, and that's just because 14-inch is portable, nice and thin. It's currently thinner and lighter than any Windows gaming laptop, which is the reason I'm currently willing to deal with macOS, but I'm looking to change that in the future because it's really been annoying me. But yeah, my point is, I care a lot about portability when I travel and not having a heavy backpack. So that's the laptop that I'm currently using. Some people will want more performance with them on the go, and they might want a bigger screen, and they're willing to make more sacrifices when it comes to that trade-off of portability and performance. I think everyone's different. Like some people, on the other hand, will want that maximum performance, and they'll be okay with taking the big 18-inch crazy beast machine with them wherever they go. Although in a lot of cases, they don't. They might not actually travel that much. I know some people who buy those 18-inch laptops, they work jobs where they have to like go overseas for a few weeks type of thing.
So like they want oil rigs.
Yeah, so they want to take like desktop level performance, or as close as they can with them on the trip. And you know, I guess if you're only carting it around like once every week or two, maybe it's not as bad compared to like, you know, daily driving it, taking it to work type of thing. So yeah, I think it just comes down to everyone's personal preference, what they're using the machine for and what they want.
Yeah, I agree. I think over time it's become harder to recommend a laptop as sort of a desktop replacement, because earlier in the release cycle of laptop GPUs, the performance difference from laptop to desktop wasn't as large because desktop GPUs were a lot lower power. And so you could really get pretty close to desktop level performance. I think the 10 series was kind of the peak of that, where the desktop and laptop products were effectively identical. These days, though, as things get more powerful on the desktop side of things, it is harder to justify that sort of buying a laptop, sitting it on your desk and plugging it into external peripherals and stuff and having that be as good as a desktop. The desktops have really ramped up in performance. And so like for my personal setup, like I've brought a laptop to Computex, but it's a thin and light 16-inch, no discrete graphics, no real gaming performance. I know it's an Intel Lunar Lake laptop as it turns out. So the iGPU isn't awful, but you're talking like 1080p low settings, sort of like almost like your Steam Deck sort of experience. So I have that, and then at home, I'm playing on a desktop. But I don't really need the gaming sort of experience. And if I was going to play games, I'd use a Steam Deck because it's portable, it's light, as you're saying, like easy to carry around, doesn't add weight to my backpack. So I guess over time, especially with the expensive gaming laptops, like you really, to get solid levels of performance, you're looking at quite a high price.
Yeah, and then you can't upgrade it in most cases. So if you want to get a new GPU, you've just got to get a new laptop.
You have to get a new laptop, and then you're forced to use obviously the screen that comes with it. And as a display enthusiast, I mean, laptop displays are honestly pretty good these days. That's obviously concerned the size of it and things like that. Yeah, I feel like a gaming laptop, at least certain types of that product have become more niche over time in terms of the way I think of it. But I guess the market is sort of saying that they're still highly popular. And I just wonder whether there are gamers out there who are buying gaming laptops when they probably should be buying a desktop instead. Like what we were talking about, the putting it on your desk and sort of leaving it there set up is probably where like even a mini RTX system or something would be a better option.
I'd agree with that. Again, I think it comes down to whether or not you need the portability, because just like being able to have one system with all your stuff on it that you can just plug in with like one cable and dock, I understand the convenience of that. And I guess a lot of people might not need crazy levels of performance because a lot of mid-range laptops are still very capable. Of course, it depends on what sort of work people are doing. But yeah, mid-range gaming laptop, and then, you know, traveling around with that, plugging it in, docking it home with maybe a bigger screen and keyboard and mouse. That's a good hybrid approach for a lot of people. For me personally, I like the desktop and then the laptop only when I travel. And, you know, I guess it would be nice if I could have just like the same OS and all my apps and everything's synced up, but you know, I don't travel too much, so I'm fine with making that sacrifice.
Yeah, I mean, you've chosen the form factor and performance that you need. And like, while I'm not the biggest fan of macOS either, it's hard to deny that their laptop hardware is very impressive in terms of performance and the software side of things. You know, like running Premiere is really flawless on like a MacBook Pro product.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, I remember I made a video on Hardware Unboxed not that long ago that was sort of exploring the value proposition of the desktop plus a portable laptop versus like the all-in-one laptop solution that would give you more power. And I think I made my case pretty well, but I guess one of the angles that I did ignore, and we got a lot of feedback from it, were people who were sort of doing the things you were saying, like they travel, but they're not traveling frequently. It's more like that one step of travel where they're going somewhere for a week or a month. Like they might be working on a film or something. And so they're set up in like Bulgaria or somewhere for like a month or 2 months filming something. They're in a hotel or an Airbnb for 2 months. You can't really bring your desktop PC in that scenario, but then you're not actually traveling a lot. So then the larger format or the oil rig example. And there was a lot of feedback that we got from that sort of thing. Pilots as well was a big one that we got.
Yeah, truck drivers is one I hear.
Yeah.
Because I think they just like set it up in the back and just, you know, use it after they're done.
But it's good to see that at least laptop makers, for people doing that sort of thing, they are making more of a concerted effort on the battery life side of things, where you're not just buying your high performance thing and it's useless off battery, which is something that we found at CES when we bought some Gigabyte laptops. One of them was like completely useless on battery, had no battery life, and was very slow as well. Like it would just cull the performance.
Yeah, I think Gigabyte in particular have had some issues. We recently reviewed one of their laptops, and it was the only one that I'm pretty sure it was the only one I've ever tested where it just like, it wouldn't even complete a battery test. Like it would just freeze and turn off. So
not the best.
Not the best.
So which brands tend to do that the best then?
I don't know if it's a brand thing so much as it depends on what the hardware inside is. So generally speaking, we've found that laptops with AMD Ryzen processors tend to be more power efficient. So like if you look at our like battery chart in the reviews, the top is pretty much just all AMD options. There are a couple of Intel options in there recently. Like I think there was a Lunar Lake one because that's relatively new, got some good power efficiency. But yeah, in terms of like the bigger gaming laptops, they're like 18-inch Intel HX ones are kind of like more towards the bottom, and then the AMD ones above.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So I guess I want to wrap up our laptop discussion. I test a lot of monitors, right? And laptops have displays too.
They do?
So I've always thought that laptops have almost led desktop monitors in terms of like specs and performance. We started to see OLEDs in laptops before desktop monitors. Same with like the mini LED LCDs and that sort of thing. What do you reckon is like the best laptop screen that's available at the moment?
It's hard to go past OLED. I think it just looks really good. Yeah. There are a few mini LED options, but I don't personally like the halo effects.
Okay, so you reckon they're quite noticeable on the small size?
Yeah, well, Because I guess I use like dark mode and then like my mouse cursor floating around makes it more obvious. Maybe if I didn't use dark mode, it'd be better.
Can you turn off the mini LED backlight on those?
It depends on the laptop. So far, I think I've only seen Asus giving you the option to swap between like individual dimming zones and then just having the whole panel act as if it's like one zone.
Yeah, okay.
So at least then you've got the choice of what you want to do, so you can change it for like different content or whatever.
Yeah, okay. And what are the sort of like refresh rate options that you're getting these days? Often laptops have like crazy high refresh rate. I mean, I guess there's 500 hertz OLEDs now, but you know, like they seem to have always been first to like each of the new refresh rates and that sort of thing.
I think there's like 1080p 480 hertz screens. There was some 360 hertz 1080p's for a while. But yeah, most of the stuff people are actually buying, like the kind of QHD plus type of resolution, I think 240 hertz is very common now.
Okay,
maybe
so not bad.
165 hertz is probably not budget, but I guess a bit on the cheaper side, whereas 240 hertz would be more of the premium stuff. And then of course with OLED, you still get those really fast response times too, which is nice.
And they usually use a slightly different format to make at least the laptop panels. We see some weird subpixel layouts and things like that on the desktop monitor side, which can affect text quality, but that's not really something you have to concern yourself with on a laptop. Often they're more like almost like phone layout that they just scale up to, you know, the laptop size, and it doesn't really affect at least at like the 1440p sort of resolutions and above. I think the text quality looks really good. Like I just brought here to see Computex. I got like the 2880 by 18, like this 1610 version.
Yeah.
It's just like a 120 hertz OLED, so not like pure gaming spec, though it is still reasonable. And the text quality on that is excellent. So I guess it's only really been a thing to concern yourself with on the desktop side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I've literally never thought about it. I've never like looked at one of the OLED laptops and thought, oh, this looks odd. So I guess it's less of an issue. Maybe just because higher pixel density.
I think it's greater pixel density. They get brighter as well. Like the full screen white brightness on a desktop OLED, 250 nits is all you're getting. On a laptop, they'll do 500.
Yeah, 500 is pretty typical.
Yeah, and apparently here at Computex at the Samsung Display QD OLED little booth thing, which was private, they didn't let me in. They wouldn't let you in either, unfortunately. I tried, but no. Apparently in there they were showing off a Display HDR 1000 laptop OLED. So that should be able to hit 1000 nits for laptop users coming soon. I think it's still like in the prototype / development phase. It's not quite ready for mass production for laptops, but that should deliver. And again, it's high resolution sort of gaming spec sort of panel, I think. So
I wonder if that'll more brightness. I'm thinking, is that going to affect burn-in?
Well, I think that's why OLED manufacturers have tried to be a little bit more conservative with brightness, because they don't want panels to burn in. And I think as they're getting more evidence over time, they're being a bit more comfortable releasing panels with higher brightness. And obviously they're still developing, you know, the actual emissive elements of the panel.
Yeah.
So as the components get better and they're doing more burn-in testing, seeing the results from desktop use, I think they're getting a little more confident in pushing brightness. It's obviously a slow process. Like we're not going to go, at least on the monitor side for desktops, from like 250 to 500 nits overnight. It seems like the next step will be this year 300 to 350 nits we'll be seeing, which is a reasonable uplift. But yeah, like burn-in is definitely going to be a concern. But I think with laptops as well, like they've got cameras in them. Like my latest laptop, if I look away from the screen, it can automatically dim or even just shut off the display if I'm not looking at it or not in front of it. Yep. Things that monitors we're only starting to see that.
Yeah.
You know, laptops are just so much more intelligent. And I think people, you know, if you were doing 8 hours of work on a monitor like every day, are you likely to do that on a laptop, or would you have like an external monitor?
Screen plugged in, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably why they'd be a bit more confident on the laptop side. And of course, like the design of the physical panels is different. Like I think you've seen a lot more like PWM sort of behavior on the OLEDs on laptops than what you'd see on a desktop monitor.
Yeah, it's anytime we notice PWM, we always have to mention it because it affects some people and, you know, get like headaches after using it for a long time. Is that really much of a thing on the desktop side?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And I've heard a lot of feedback from people that their level of sensitivity can be different at different hertz, like the flicker hertz.
Yeah.
So with desktop OLED, you get a very slight flicker at every refresh. So that'll always match the refresh rate the panel is at. So if it's at 240 hertz, you'll get a very small dip every refresh over 240 hertz. I think on the laptop panels, it can often be every second refresh or every, so the flicker will be like 480 hertz on a 240 hertz panel, which is a bit better. Some people have no problems with that at all. Like they won't notice it. I don't notice it. It's a very small dip, but then we've heard from people that are sensitive to that gives them a lot of eye strain.
Yeah.
So if you've been using an OLED and you've like, I'm getting a lot of fatigue using this panel, it can be because of that slight flicker, which unfortunately is worse on the laptop panels. But then we've heard from people, there's flicker-free certifications where they're like, this panel will certify it. There's no flicker of up to 3,000 hertz or something, which is quite high. But even some people are still sensitive to a flicker at 4 kilohertz, 4,000 hertz, or 5,000 hertz. They're like, I'm extremely sensitive to flicker. These flicker-free monitors, they're advertised, they're certified by external bodies. They look into the actual way it's tested, and it turns out it's actually not flicker-free. And I've tested some of those monitors personally where it's flicker-free. My test tool is sensitive to some ridiculous level, so it kind of shows up.
Yeah.
But then there are actual true flicker-free, it's hard to say. There are true flicker-free monitors where there is no PWM at all. And so they have to be on the hunt for those products.
Yeah.
So I think it's even more of a product, because you've sent me some of your weird charts every once in a while, like how do I test this? And the mini LED products seem to be super problematic on both desktop and laptop in the flicker front. Like they just go wild.
I hate testing response time on mini LED and OLED, and unfortunately, those panels are becoming more and more popular. So
it's pretty much everything, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Just annoying from a testing perspective. Very nice to use otherwise.
So what else have you seen Computex outside of the laptop side? Obviously, you still you have a gaming desktop and that sort of thing that sort of interested you.
I mean, we haven't really looked around too much apart from the laptop stuff, so it's kind of hard to say. We did a little tour with MSI and they showed us some of their desktop stuff, but yeah, apart from that, we didn't really look at too much. I mean, we had a quick look through just like all the booths to see all the weird stuff they've got going on.
Okay.
Like all the AI and the robots and random stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, some of the stuff this year. I feel like, and I was talking to Steve about this as well, like last year's Computex was everything had to be AI. This year, I feel like they're being a little more selective. It's like the products they know are not going to hit on the AI front, like gaming SSDs. They're like, cut that out.
Cases,
We're
AI,
not,
PSU.
We'll not do AI cases, but then in the enterprise and pro stuff, that's like even more crazy on the AI sort of front. And obviously there's still a lot of products that are sort of branded as AI things, like, there's monitor features that are like, this is AI crosshair or AI.
I've stopped mentioning it when it's in product names. A lot of laptops just have it in the product name. I just don't say the AI bit.
Yeah, I think it's pointless.
It adds nothing.
Especially like with monitor features, if they claim it's AI and in my opinion it's not, I say it's not AI. It can be hard to distinguish those things, but I think generally monitors aren't powerful enough to do a lot of the AI stuff on them. Like,
yeah, probably not.
They're not running large language models in there. It's probably just normal.
Monitor's got like 96 gigs of VRAM.
Yeah, it's like image detection has been something that has been done before this AI thing. So like detecting people's faces and stuff, I don't know whether that classifies, but that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, like AI, I think there's been, I guess I've noticed like the big AI companies now have bigger booths, more money to spend on their booths. Like there's a huge Vertiv booth who I think are a big supplier of like server hardware for AI products. They've got a massive, like very impressive setup now. And all those companies have been able to really boost what they're sort of showing. But yeah, I've tried to ignore that.
Yeah, they've got the AI cash.
What?
They've got the AI cash, like money.
Oh, right.
They can spend on the big fancy booths.
They definitely can. So yeah, but yeah, Computex is filled with all the like super interesting little niche things that you see in the corner. That's always around the place. So yeah, it's been interesting. So I guess we'll pretty much wrap up the podcast, right? There's not much else to talk about unless you want to talk more laptops to the Hard Run Box audience.
No, I think that's pretty well covered.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Jared, for coming on board and having a chat about laptops, because yeah, some interesting naming things have been happening since we've sort of stopped talking about laptops too much on our channel.
That's good. I don't really have too many other people to complain about with all this stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, it's been nice to have a chat, and obviously we catch up whenever we can. So I'm guessing you'll be heading to CES next year if there's laptops to see. And
yeah, we'll see. Depends on whether there's anything interesting going on.
Yeah, cool. Well, I might see you there.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, thanks for listening to the podcast. All the people who've listened to this to the end, we always appreciate you. So we've got Hardware Unboxed Podcast, Patreon. Well, the Hardware Unboxed Patreon gives you access to our supporter feed for the podcast. Check out Jared's channel at Jared's Tech if you need specifically gaming laptops. He covers pretty much everything, tests all the important stuff, all the components, and you've got the deals website that you mentioned as well, which is what, like laptop.deals, very easy to remember.
I wish. No, gaminglaptop.deals.
Gaminglaptop. I've just redirected people to a website you don't own.
Maybe don't go to that one. I don't know what's there.
Oh, we don't know. It could be something dodgy. So gaminglaptop.deals.
That's the one.
Cool. Head to that one. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.